Welcome to the Lawyerist Podcast with Sam Glover and Aaron Street. Each week, Lawyerist brings you advice and interviews to help you build a more successful law practice in today's challenging and constantly changing legal market. And now, here are Sam and Aaron.
Hi, I'm Sam Glover.
And I'm Aaron Street, and this is episode 150 of the Lawyerist Podcast, part of the Legal Talk Network. Today, we're talking with Dean Cardinale about business lessons learned in the dead zone of Mount Everest.
I know that sounds pretty badass, doesn't it?
Totally.
Yeah, it is pretty badass. Today's podcast is sponsored by Clio Legal Practice Management Software. Clio makes running your law firm easier. Try it for free today at Clio.com.
Today's podcast is also sponsored by Ruby Receptionists and its smart, charming receptionists who are perfect for small firms. Visit callruby.com/lawyerist to get a risk-free trial with Ruby. So way back in episode 18, we had an interview with our friend Shannon Hoagland where you and she talked about kind of creative networking tips. And during that episode, part of the conversation was about one of your techniques, which is that you often, when meeting a new person and doing networking, highlight the fact that one of your passions and hobbies is winter camping.
I don't know if it's a technique.
Tip?
Obsession.
Thing you do?
Thing I love to talk about if given any excuse.
Yeah, well, and part of the hook in episode 18 was about how it makes networking really easy when you have something interesting that you're passionate about that you can fall back on when you're making cold introductions to people you don't know and doing kind of networking chit-chat.
And just to be clear, it's not golf.
Right. It's interesting.
Yeah.
And so in episode 18, we're talking about your passion/hobby of winter camping. And so I happened to randomly sit next to Dean at a conference a couple of months ago and heard about some of his exploits of polar expeditions and climbing Kilimanjaro dozens and dozens of times. And he had just the day before gotten back from the Everest base camp. I was
awesome.
like, shit. This is a guy who both needs to be on our podcast and who Sam needs to meet.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the impetus for bringing Dean on. He's not a lawyer. You two aren't going to talk about law. He's going to talk about going to the North Pole and Everest and climbing to the tops of dangerous mountains and things like that, but with the hook of how that can relate to both how you think about the work you do in the world and about kind of using extreme sports as an example of achieving big goals in your life and how that can help you as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, overcoming challenges is overcoming challenges. It kind of doesn't matter. I mean, physical challenges are hard in a different way than business challenges, but the concepts stretch.
So in this episode of our Law Practice Podcast, we will be talking about climbing Mount Everest. Literally.
Yeah, actually, we're going to talk about that and other badassery that Dean has engaged in. And if anything, you'll see that I'm a little bit shy talking to him because I think he's cool. He's super cool. So that said, here's my conversation with Dean. Quick warning, my audio during this interview is pretty terrible. I decided to work from home during some bad weather and use an old mic, and that was a bad decision. Paul, our audio editor, has done his best with it, but it is still pretty bad on my end. I really enjoyed the interview, so I hope that comes across despite the bad quality on my end.
Okay, my name's Dean Cardinale. I am an adventurer from Salt Lake City, Utah. I've worked the last 25 years as an avalanche forecaster at Snowbird Ski Resort here in Utah, along with mountain rescue in the Wasatch Mountains here in Utah. I also am an international mountaineer and guide and have guided expeditions and trips all over the world. I operate and own a company called Worldwide Trekking, where we take people on adventures in Nepal and Tanzania, Africa, South America, pretty much worldwide, as well as a nonprofit where we give back to the local areas as we travel.
I'm so glad you're here with us. And adventure is the coolest sounding job title I can think of. When you post a job description, do you seeking adventures?
You know, it's funny. I do a lot of talks for different organizations and groups, and I'm always, I was doing one a few years ago for the Wilderness Medical Society, and I looked at the program that all these speakers, and I was the only one that didn't say MD. They all, in my name, said Dean Cardinale, adventurer.
That's
and I
awesome.
thought that was pretty funny.
That is so cool. So, you've written about your adventures in a book called Inspired.
Yes.
I know you wrote it with the idea that risk-taking and being careful about it can inform business and risk-taking in business. And I thought that was really accurate because I think most people who've gone on adventures kind of feel the same way. But maybe we should start by talking about sort of the nature of risk and the difference between how adventurers are perceived as risk takers and what it actually means in the day-to-day.
I think one of the things that's important in an adventure, some lifestyle, and even a career or job that is risky in a physical sense, meaning if there's an accident, I could be harmed, killed, my partners, my team, whoever I'm working with. So the consequences are really large. And that's what we try to do is we do the research, get properly educated on being able to make good decisions in a natural environment most of the time. And then deciding what is the acceptable amount of risk that you're willing to take. And if there is an accident, what are the consequences of your action? Is it just a setback, or am I going to have a catastrophe here and have a really bad accident? So trying to identify what the consequences are. You can make a lot of mistakes, you just can't make the big one.
You're a skier and a mountaineer and a general adventurer. I like to go winter camping, and I think about winter camping as a little bit more like a chess match with the environment, in contrast to flying down a mountain, which is much more like blood rushing in your head, thrill. There's a planning and risk-taking and assessment that goes into it beforehand, but everything happens very quickly. Whereas, I imagine when you're climbing Mount Everest, the thing that kills you is a decision you made hours or days ago, not necessarily the thing that you just decided right then and there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think when you're you focus on your bigger objective and you are climbing Mount Everest. For me, I summited Mount Everest on the 67th day after I set out from Utah. So, you have to stay focused for a really long period of time. And during the more hazardous parts of the climb, the Khumbu Icefall, the Lhotse Face, the upper elevations, we're talking about a month and a half or so of climbing on the mountain itself. And, I like to look at it in two ways. Number one, I set out an objective for the day. I'm trying to get from camp 1 to camp 2, say, and then I think about all the obstacles that are in my way, all the hazards that could come up, and then I focus on the moment in front of me. So I'm totally focused on what I'm doing now, so I don't have distractions that make it so I don't recognize a hazard that comes up. And in the mountains, I think, and it can be applied a lot of places, a plan can be your worst enemy, because having too much set into a plan means that my focus is just to get to the next camp. It's not to recognize the crevasses that are around me and the obstacles that I have to avoid. So we have to deviate from our plan in the mountains a lot, because like winter camping for you, because the weather forecast says one thing, and now it's blowing 40 miles an hour or 60 miles an hour, I'm going to adjust to the environment around me constantly.
I got a chance to listen to Chris Hadfield, the astronaut, recently talk about how they plan missions, and he said basically all they talk about is failure.
Yep.
And then for each failure that they anticipate, for each thing that could go wrong, they come up with a contingency plan. And that sounded to me a lot like what you described doing on Everest, and part of it, or on any mountain, but especially on Everest, it really came home to me, because I didn't realize this before, but you spend 48 hours in the death zone, meaning like the oxygen is so thin that your brain can't function properly, and so you're trying to have this chess match with the mountain when you can't think properly. What's that like?
Yeah, and that's you basically you chalk that up to years and years of experiences that you've gone through and all those failures, right? And then on the mountain, oftentimes the day before, constantly I'm in my life in general, but you're playing the what if game up there.
Mm-hmm.
So I go through this game like, if this happens, I'm going to do this. And if this happens, I'm going to do that while I'm in a clear state of mind. So when you get up into a hypoxic state where you're not coming up, for lack of a better word, you're not really coming up with any great ideas up there. You better have pre-thought about them. You better have maybe had some experiences on past climbs and other situations that you can apply to the situation you're in at the moment and make a good decision.
You use a term that I've used and that I guess I'm sure I've heard lots of outdoor enthusiasts use, which is you have to learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes.
Because there's nothing comfortable about being in a hypoxic state at the top of a mountain when everything around you is trying to kill you. But you have to be able to just be cool and make level-headed decisions.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. Up there, it comes into play so much. I say it to so many people that I guide. Mountaineering is the art of being uncomfortable, or being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And it's really about a patience game. It's really about knowing, say, if I have a headache at high altitude because of a lack of pressure in the air, that with time it's going to go away and I just can focus on my breathing and hydrating, little inconveniences, or being very cold, or getting to the tent exhausted and having to set up your tent and make snow into water and then heat the water up to drink and then make some soup or something to eat and things like that. It's just this constant battle with an uncomfortable surrounding. And I think the more you do it, the more you can enjoy knowing the ultimate, challenge comes with that. And that as you get through it, it's gonna be a great thing that you accomplish.
It's kind of it's like training for resilience, I guess.
Yeah, and you really have to be. I mean, I couldn't agree more about the failure aspect of things. It's these minor setbacks, minor failures. And, in your mind, I always think of failures as an opportunity to have learned something and an opportunity to try again.
Well, I was going to say, so you started two businesses, and I'm wondering if you see the parallels. I assume you see the parallels between being comfortable, being uncomfortable due to the environment, and being comfortable, being uncomfortable because of the business risk you're taking, or the money situation that you find yourself in, or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, I did start my business. I've been a ski patrolman and avalanche forecaster for 15 years and had been guiding for other agencies. Like a lot of businesses that they start from frustration of thinking you can do it a better way. I started my business in my employee housing dorm room up at Snowbird, and it was uncomfortable at first. I was not a businessman, so to say. But I had guests that wanted to go on trips. I wanted to offer them something more. And in the beginning, I didn't have much, so I didn't have much to lose with my business. But as I grew and then moved into a home office, and I was still working all by myself, and now I have, a team of about 10 people in a large office space, with different jobs, then that was when it really got more uncomfortable for me, because I wasn't as used to running a business and a business team, but I thought of them more as one of my groups, expedition groups, guided groups that need information, direction, encouragement, and an idea of what we're all trying to accomplish together. And it's kind of come around.
I suppose that's sort of how we all start, right? We have an idea. But it turns out that running a business is not the same thing as what we developed our expertise in, and that transition is uncomfortable.
Yeah, it was very uncomfortable. It was definitely, met with setbacks and some frustrations and a lot of uncertainty. And after, I'd say the time when it started to get the most uncomfortable for me was about 2 years ago, where I started to take a more advisory consulting job at the ski resort. That was kind of my day job, and then left that, and now I consult there. And I took on my business as my full-time career, I had people working for me, but I was still kind of double dipping. I was still doing both.
Mm-hmm.
And that was uncomfortable, because then all of a sudden it was like, wow, this is my total focus now, is my two businesses. And it's been fun. I guess in the one thing for me is I enjoy the excitement of uncertainty and trying to, figure it out.
And we didn't dive into this at the beginning, but the two businesses are Worldwide Trekking and the Human Outreach Project, and they kind of weave together, it sounds like. So maybe you could talk just a little bit about both of those, and especially how the Human Outreach Project comes out of the trekking company.
So Worldwide Trekking is an adventure travel company, and when I started it after a long mountaineering career, I wanted to make it an opportunity-based company for people to come on trips from, California to Connecticut and everywhere in between, all over the world, sign up for one of our trips and go climb Kilimanjaro or trek to Mount Everest Base Camp, do an adventure challenge for them that would be guided, and they could go on these amazing trips and accomplish great goals. Because of my experience traveling overseas, I had seen all too often the places where people struggle with everyday life in Nepal and Africa and areas of South America. And I thought that if I was going to be bringing over, these groups of adventure travelers, that we should do something as a business to give back to those local communities. So, now we run a lot of trips on Kilimanjaro and Tanzania, Africa, and safaris. And we have an orphanage there on 4 acres of land. And we have a school lunch program where we feed 850 kids lunch every single day. And in Nepal, we just cut the ribbon on a new medical clinic in an area that treks through to the Annapurna region. And down in South America, where we trek in the Andes, we opened 2 computer centers at schools this last year. So, they kind of go hand in hand. I really think that we should, give back to the areas that we're doing our business in.
Yeah. I assume you sleep quite well knowing what you've accomplished. That sounds really awesome.
It's been really cool. It's been such a blessing in disguise. In the beginning, I found myself, formulating these relationships with my overseas contacts and communities, and you want to do something for them. And knowing in the beginning I started out by bringing 2 duffel bags full of supplies for every group I would take. And then because of certain areas I found to maybe not distribute the supplies as they should or take advantage of it, that's when I started to look to buy land to build the orphanage in Tanzania or take more solid programs on. Right now, over the holidays, we're a Utah-based company, and we delivered holiday Thanksgiving food supplies to veterans in the area, as well as gift cards to Walmart, and they'll get another supply of food during the week before Christmas holiday. And as well, we're doing 12 sponsored families for kids that would not celebrate the holiday over Christmas time if they did not have some outside support. So we also have programs in the U.S.
So I'm curious because, of course, I read the book. I learned a little bit about you, and I'm like, geez, what if I want to go to Kilimanjaro, or I want to go to Everest Base Camp? What does a trip to Kilimanjaro typically run, price-wise?
Run for Kilimanjaro about $4,900. That includes everything from the time you show up in Tanzania until the time we drop you back off. So it's lodging before for a couple nights with all your meals, permits, guide team, all of the mountain facilities, the climb on Kilimanjaro. Afterwards, we spend another night and have celebration dinner, and then oftentimes people go on a safari after that.
Wait, does that include airfare, or do I have to get myself there?
No, it doesn't include international airfare. Whenever we have a trip where you have domestic flights, like helicopter rides or charters to get into a landing strip to start a trek, like in Nepal, then that would be all included. So basically, I tried to make it so everything, usually a professional or somebody who signs up for one of our trips can, get the gear list, get our training plan, and consult back and forth with them as they prepare over months before the trip. And then when they show up on the trip, they are properly geared up. We've given them the direction on training and consulting. And then when they show up, they simply meet the other 12 or 14 people that are on the adventure, and everything is transportation, lodging, all their meals, permits, everything is covered, and they can just enjoy the adventure and focus on the elements that they're going to be dealing with along the way.
Well, I know what I'm asking for Christmas. That's not as much as I thought it was going to be.
I got to say that I am so lucky to see, first, I see so many groups of strangers become great friends. Because you can imagine when you go on a trip, say you and a spouse or a buddy or somebody come on a trip, and you don't know the other 10 people on the trip. By the time you're halfway or through that trip or experience, you've made new lifelong friendships there. And I see it again and again. And also have the opportunity to help people challenge themselves. The art of guiding is pushing someone beyond what they think they can do, but not beyond what they're capable of doing. So it's that balance right there that helps them determine who they really are themselves. And you have to kind of read them and see what kind of output they're going to give you, and push them right to their limits, but also make sure you're not pushing them, over the edge.
I've been on a couple of outward bound trips, and on the first one that I went on, my instructor talked about it like the rings on the stump of the tree. And every time you try something new and push yourself to have a new experience, it's like you're the tree growing a little bit, and you're adding a ring to the tree. And that's your comfort zone. And the bigger your comfort zone gets, the more comfortable you'll be doing anything else in your life. But you're right, like the people that you expand your comfort zone with, that's a bonding thing that you just take with you.
Yeah, and that goes back to that being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And the more experiences that you have, the more times I'm up in a tent, making water out of snow and in my bag, trying to stay warm and doing all that stuff, the more it just seems like adventure to me. And it's, you get comfortable with that element that you're in.
So we need to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. And when we come back, Dean, I'm going to ask you whether or not it's possible to burn snow.
Okay. That sounds good.
Imagine what you could do with an extra 8 hours per week. You could invest in marketing your firm, you could spend more time helping clients in need, or you could catch your daughter's soccer game. That's how much time legal professionals save with Clio, the world's leading practice management software. With Clio, tracking time, billing, and matter management are fast and easy, giving you more time to focus on what really matters. And Clio is a complete practice management platform with plenty of tools and over 50 integrations to help you automate daily tasks such as document generation and court calendaring. See how the right software can make it easier to manage your practice. Try Clio for free today at Clio.com.
This podcast is supported by Ruby Receptionists. As a matter of fact, Ruby answers our phones at Lawyerist, and my firm was a paying Ruby customer before that. Here's what I love about Ruby. When I'm in the middle of something, I hate to be interrupted, so when the phone rings, it annoys me, and that often carries over into the conversation I have after I pick up the phone, which is why I'm better off not answering my own phone. Instead, Ruby answers the phone, and if the person on the other end asks for me, a friendly, cheerful receptionist from Ruby calls me and asks if I want them to put the call through. It's a buffer that gives me a minute to let go of my annoyance and be a better human being during the call. If you want to be a better human being on the phone, give Ruby a try. Go to callruby.com/lawyerist to sign up, and Ruby will waive the $95 setup fee. If you aren't happy with Ruby for any reason, you can get your money back during your first 3 weeks. I'm pretty sure you'll stick around, but since there is no risk, you might as well try. So we're back, and Dean, like I mentioned, I love to go winter camping. I've been going for years, and somewhere along the way, somebody decided that you had to be careful when you melt snow because you might burn it, which I maintain is completely ludicrous. But I think you probably melted a lot more snow than me, so I'm curious, can you burn snow?
I think no matter how bad a cook you are, I would have a hard time burning snow. I can say that there is somewhat an art form of making snow into water, picking the dense snow pieces and not making your water pot too cold, else you just wait a lot longer. But I don't think we'd burn it. No. And if we did in those environments, you'd probably still drink it.
Probably wouldn't mind.
You wouldn't mind so much.
You were telling a story about yourself, which resonated with me on a number of levels. But am I pronouncing Cho-Oyu right?
Cho-Oyu, yeah.
Yeah, and maybe you could just talk about, maybe you could just tell a little bit about the story of what happened and how you found yourself in a weird position, and it led to you mentioning in the book hazardous attitudes.
Okay. Well, I'd say one of the things that's interesting about the mountains is, like, we all know of Mount Everest and Kilimanjaro, but there's so many other mountains out there, like Cho-Oyu, the sixth highest mountain in the world. It's 27,000 feet. And I was privately guiding that mountain. And after about 5 weeks, a month or so on the climb, my client had fallen sick, and he was going to need to go down and go home. And as we were packing up around camp, it wasn't a life-threatening illness, but he couldn't go on to continue the climb. And we were packing up around camp, and I said, he had been with me a number of times before. I said, hey, I could walk you back out to the pickup point for the vehicle. What do you think if I stay here and finish this climb off? And at that point, he had been a client that had become a good friend as well. And he was like, no, you should do it. We're here. We put the time in. We're acclimatized. I was ready. We had all of our facilities ready. So I went back up, and I was going to just solo the rest of the climb. Got back to base camp. Well, that year it had been a really high avalanche danger on the mountain. They had a weak layer, and it kept snowing, and we kept having numerous avalanches that were occurring on the mountain. And, I've worked with the avalanches a long time, and I think nonetheless, you kind of get that tunnel vision, like, I'm here. I spent the time, put the effort in, and I started to work my way from base camp up to Camp 1, work my way up to Camp 2. And as I got up to Camp 2, it was still quite unstable out, and there was a lot going on. There's another huge avalanche came down, took out a team. And it's when I really had that realization. And it's funny because I teach this to so many people during avalanche courses and different mountain courses, the hazardous attitudes. And it goes back to the fact that the mountain, just like life or business or so many things, the mountain doesn't care that I'm a guide or a seasoned professional. The mountain doesn't care that I have a family at home that would miss me if I was killed. There's no feeling there from the mountain. And you just have to react with it. So the hazardous attitudes, I think, in any mistake that's ever, been made in my natural environment, settings, I would say that those attitudes fall into having made at least one or maybe more of these attitudes. Do you want me to go down the list of hazardous attitudes?
Yeah, actually, I think it's useful because when I'm reading that story, I am not a mountain climber. I have not had the level of adventures you have, but I had a time when I tend to be the leader of the group in the Boundary Waters, and it was negative 30 degrees out, and I was really committed to it, and I started recognizing some of them in myself. I was getting cold to the point where I was making bad decisions, and I thought I was making good decisions. I wanted to go, and I felt like we had to just stop and build a fire to get warm.
Right.
And I mean, like fire does not warm you up at negative 30. But fortunately, while we were stomping around, I warmed up, came to my senses, and realized what a dangerous set of decisions I was making. And as you were going through the list of 5, that's the event that I often think of, where I'm like, yeah, no, I totally defeated myself with those attitudes. So I think it'd be useful to kind of run through them.
Yeah, so that's a good example of, and there are no particular order as far as they go, but I'd say that would be more of like a overconfidence or a macho attitude that can get in the way of people when you're guiding. Or when you're in charge of other people, like they're expecting you to give them the result, if I'm guiding people in powder snow situation and there's an avalanche hazard, it's up to me to recognize that maybe I'm not going to give them the best ski day because of the hazard that's out there. So being, overconfident or a macho attitude, we could call that number one. That could get you in trouble real easily. Another one would be invulnerability. So thinking that, it can't happen to you. Bad things happen to other people. Oh, I'll be fine. Can't happen to me. So feeling invulnerable to the situation. The next one, impulsivity or being impulsive. So, going quicker doesn't generally make it safer for us. Sometimes there's times to move fast and sometimes there's time to take pause, but being too impulsive doesn't make it any more safe. Anti-authority. I think, these are, the preset guidelines that we all live our life by, or maybe different businesses run by. Rules are generally and protocols are generally put in place to give good guidance. So, recognizing your authority, recognizing the protocols and abiding by them is really important. And then lastly, resignation. And this does happen in the mountains where people get up in a bad storm, in a bad situation. When we were talking before, you mentioned my time on Denali in Alaska, where I was crawling around on my hands and knees trying to find my way off the mountain. Could have easily, gave up to resignation and said, like, this is it. I can't find my way. I give up. So not giving up.
But you said in the book, you don't get to give up. You die.
That's it. That's you pay the ultimate. Going back to consequences. Yeah. That's the ultimate consequence. You're not going to lose a bunch of money. You're not going to, have some people get upset with you because it didn't work out. You're going to die. So you pay the ultimate consequence for your action. I think the hazardous attitudes, as we go down, the resignation, anti-authority, impulsive, invulnerability, or overconfidence, all of those, first of all, have to be challenged. Like every time that you want to keep moving and move quickly, you can't say, "Oh, I should slow down." You have to challenge authority, right? You have to ask questions and you have to ask why, but you can't just. You have to push every bit of these to their limit. But then I think you need to recognize when it's going too far. Any single one of these hazardous attitudes, when you're pushing it too far. And then it's really important to, as I did on Show OU, break the chain.
Yeah.
You say, I recognize that, I need to go down, else I'm going to pay the ultimate consequence for my actions here. So recognizing it is really important. And I think it goes back to, like I was saying, about having a plan. If you have a plan and you follow your plan too precisely and you're not willing to be flexible and make small changes and kind of dance with the plan, then there's a good chance that you're not going to get to the end of that idea or carry out that whole plan.
It's almost like, as one of the things I kept thinking about as I'm reading about you deciding to, abandon the trip is the sunk cost fallacy, right? The idea that you've come this far, so you might as well finish it out.
Yeah.
Or that you're so invested, you might as well go the rest of the way. And, I could feel you making that decision when you were with your wife, actually, on your honeymoon, and you're close to the summit, and you're just like, maybe I've lost sight of the whole point here.
Yeah. And I think, that brings up a great point. I mean, we call it summit fever. You're 500 feet for the summit, but if I'm behind my turnaround time, there's a bunch of things that, maybe the weather's changing. And when we get to the summit on a mountain climb, you're only halfway there. The goal is to get down. With my wife on my honeymoon, the whole thing was, the realization was, enjoy the journey. And I tell every person that comes on one of our trips, like, you're going to stand on the top of Kilimanjaro and take your new Facebook photo for, 15, 20 minutes or so. We're going to be at this for 7 days. If you want to enjoy all the moments each day and stop and take photographs and talk with your friend on the trail and walk and, just take it all in, enjoy the journey. And I think that that's so, so important. And, it goes back again to being comfortable, being uncomfortable. and knowing that if you can enjoy the journey, all that stuff's not going to feel so bad.
Dean, thanks so much for your stories and your insights.
My pleasure.
If people want to learn more about worldwide trekking and maybe find the summit of Kilimanjaro with you, where do they go?
Yeah, visit our website at www.trek.com. So that's worldwide trekking. And you can always give us a phone call here in the office, 801-943-0264.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being with us today, Dean.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Make sure to catch next week's episode of the Lawyerist podcast by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast app. And please leave a rating to help other people find our show. You can find the notes for today's episode on lawyerist.com/podcast.
The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not endorsed by Legal Talk Network. Nothing said in this podcast is legal advice for you.